Better Call Saul is basically a 6-season masterclass in watching people destroy their own lives through bad decisions. It's like Breaking Bad, but slower and somehow even more painful because you see every single choice that leads to disaster. Every character in this show has that one moment where they make a decision that ruins everything. And the worst part is, you can see it coming. You're sitting there watching like, please don't do this, please just walk away, and they do it anyway. Jimmy Mcgill, the Sandpiper scam. So Jimmy's biggest mistake, the one that really sets everything in motion, is when he can't resist going back to his old ways with the Sandpiper Crossing case. Here's the context. Jimmy actually manages to get a job at HHM, which is this prestigious law firm his brother Chuck works at. It's everything Jimmy wanted. Legitimacy, respect, a chance to practice real law with real resources. Kim trusts him. He's got a path to becoming the lawyer he always said he wanted to be. And then he discovers this massive elder abuse case at Sandpiper Crossing, this retirement home that's been overcharging residents. It's a legitimate case, a good case, the kind of case that could make his career. But Jimmy being Jimmy, he can't just do it the right way. He has to run a con to get evidence. He has to cross ethical lines. He has to do things that put the whole case at risk. Now you might say, okay, but that's just Jimmy being resourceful. That's how he operates. But here's the real mistake. Even after he gets caught, even after he sees how his shortcuts are damaging his credibility and his relationships, he keeps doing it. He keeps conning, keeps cutting corners, keeps being slippin' Jimmy, and the worst part is, it's not even about the money at that point, it's deeper than greed. Jimmy fundamentally doesn't believe he deserves to succeed, honestly. He's so used to being the screw-up, so used to being the guy who has to cheat to win, that when he finally has a chance to win legitimately, he sabotages himself. This pattern destroys his relationship with Chuck, who already didn't believe in him. It cements his identity as someone who can't be trusted, and it starts him down the path that eventually leads to Saul Goodman and then to Gene Takovic, hiding in a Cinnabon in Omaha. If Jimmy had just played it straight with Sandpiper, if he'd just done the work legitimately and trusted the system for once, his entire life would be different. Chuck might have eventually accepted him. Kim would have stayed. He could have been the lawyer he claimed he wanted to be, but he chose the con. He always chooses the con. And that choice cost him everything that actually mattered. Kim Wexler, going against Howard. Kim's worst mistake is agreeing to destroy Howard Hamlin's reputation. And honestly, this one hurts the most because Kim knew better. Throughout most of the show, Kim is the moral center. She's the one with ethics and principles. She does pro bono work because she actually cares about helping people. She's trying to use the law for good, while Jimmy's out there bending every rule he can find. But something shifts in Kim. Maybe it's boredom with playing by the rules. Maybe it's resentment toward people like Howard who seem to have everything handed to them. Maybe it's her twisted loyalty to Jimmy making her think she needs to prove she's on his level. Whatever the reason, Kim becomes obsessed with taking Howard down. And I'm not talking about just beating him in court or proving him wrong professionally. I'm talking about an elaborate, cruel scheme to destroy his reputation, make him look incompetent, ruin his career. Howard didn't really do anything to deserve this. Yeah, he was kind of pompous and he made some mistakes with Kim's career early on, but he's not a bad guy. He actually tries to make things right with Kim. He's just this guy trying to do his job and maintain his firm's reputation. But Kim doesn't care. She goes all in on this plan with Jimmy. They gaslight Howard, they manipulate him, they set up this whole scheme to make him look like he's on drugs or having a mental breakdown during a mediation. And it works. They completely humiliate him. Howard's professional reputation is destroyed in front of his colleagues and clients. Everything he's built is falling apart. But then, and this is the real consequence, Howard comes to confront them. He shows up at their apartment to tell them he knows what they did and he's not going to let them get away with it. And while he's there, Lalo walks in and shoots Howard in the head. Howard dies because Kim and Jimmy brought chaos into their lives. Their scheme against him put him in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Kim has to live with that forever. And years later, she writes a confession about what they did to Howard and sends it to his widow. She destroys any chance she had at a peaceful life because she needs everyone to know what she did. That's the real tragedy of Kim's mistake. She had everything. She was a brilliant lawyer with a bright future. She had integrity and principles, and she threw it all away to hurt someone who didn't deserve it. And in the process, she destroyed herself. Chuck Mcgill, sabotaging Jimmy's career. Chuck's worst mistake is letting his pride and resentment toward Jimmy poison everything he does. Chuck is this brilliant lawyer, a founding partner at HHM, respected by everyone in the legal community. He's got everything someone could want in terms of professional success, but he's also got this massive insecurity about his younger brother. Jimmy looks up to Chuck. Despite all his flaws and mistakes, Jimmy genuinely admires his brother and wants Chuck's approval. When Jimmy passes the bar exam and becomes a lawyer, he's so excited to tell Chuck. He thinks maybe finally he can earn his brother's respect. But Chuck can't handle it. He can't stand the idea of Jimmy slipping, Jimmy who used to run scams and couldn't even finish college normally, being a lawyer like him. It offends Chuck's sense of what the law should be, so Chuck sabotages Jimmy. When Jimmy brings the Sandpiper case to HHM, which could be huge for his career, Chuck takes credit for it. He tells Howard not to hire Jimmy. He actively works behind the scenes to block Jimmy's opportunities while pretending to be supportive to Jimmy's face. And Chuck tells himself he's doing this to protect the integrity of the law. He's got this whole speech about how the law is sacred and Jimmy's just gonna abuse it and hurt people. But that's not really what's going on. What's really happening is Chuck is jealous. Jimmy is charismatic and people like him in ways they never liked Chuck. Jimmy can connect with people and make them laugh and talk his way through situations. Chuck can't do any of that. Chuck is cold and rigid and people respect him, but they don't really like him. So Chuck punishes Jimmy for being everything Chuck isn't. He steals Jimmy's achievements, he blocks his opportunities, and worst of all, he gaslights Jimmy into thinking that Jimmy's the problem, that Jimmy's just not good enough and never will be. And when Jimmy finally confronts Chuck about it, when Jimmy forces Chuck to admit in court that he's been sabotaging him, it destroys both of them. Chuck has a mental breakdown. His electromagnetic hypersensitivity gets worse. He becomes obsessed with proving he was right about Jimmy. Eventually, Chuck's condition and his depression lead him to kill himself. He knocks over a lantern in his house and lets the fire spread. And the tragedy is that if Chuck had just supported Jimmy, if he'd just been a brother instead of a rival, maybe both of them could have had the relationship they needed. Chuck's mistake was letting his pride matter more than his family. He had to be superior, had to be the good son, the successful one, the respected one. And that need destroyed both brothers. Mike Ehrmantraut, taking money from the Salamancas. Mike's worst mistake is accepting that $50,000 from Hector Salamanca, and once he does that, there's no going back. So Mike's whole thing is he's trying to atone for his son's death. His son was a cop in Philadelphia who got killed because of corruption in the department. Mike feels responsible because he's the one who told his son to go along with the dirty cops to survive. That guilt drives everything Mike does. Mike comes to Albuquerque to help his daughter-in-law and his granddaughter. He wants to provide for them, make sure they're safe and taken care of. That's his mission. That's what he's living for. Then he gets into a situation with Tuco Salamanca. Tuco beats up Mike, and Mike wants revenge, so he sets up this whole thing to get Tuco arrested. But Hector Salamanca figures out what happened, and he threatens Mike's family to make him change his story in court. Mike's terrified. This is exactly what he was trying to avoid. His family is in danger because of choices he made. So he changes his testimony and Tuco gets a lighter sentence. Then Hector offers Mike $50,000 as payment for changing his testimony. And Mike takes it. Now on the surface, you could argue Mike didn't have a choice. Hector was threatening his family. What was he supposed to do? But here's the thing, once Mike takes that money, he's not just a victim of the cartel anymore. He's an employee. He's someone they can call on again. He's in business with them. And that's exactly what happens. Taking that money leads to more work for the Salamancas, which leads to Mike trying to kill Hector, which leads to Gus stepping in and hiring Mike, which leads to Mike becoming Gus's right-hand man and fixer. Every terrible thing Mike does after that point, all the people he kills, all the crimes he commits, it all traces back to accepting that $50,000. He told himself he was just taking care of his family, but really he was selling his soul. Mike's tragedy is that his love for his granddaughter is what corrupts him. He wants to leave her money, wants to give her a better life, but the way he goes about it turns him into exactly the kind of criminal that got his son killed in the first place. If Mike had refused that money, if he'd found some other way to protect his family or just moved them somewhere safe, he could have stayed clean. He could have been the good grandfather instead of the criminal leaving blood money to a kid who's eventually gonna find out where it came from. Gus Fring, underestimating Lalo. Gus's worst mistake is assuming Lalo Salamanca was dead and letting his guard down. Gus is meticulous about everything. The guy plans years in advance. He's building a super lab under a laundry facility. He's slowly poisoning Hector Salamanca. He's playing the long game against the cartel while maintaining his cover as a legitimate businessman. He thinks through every detail of every operation. But with Lalo, Gus makes a critical error. He orders a hit on Lalo in Mexico. Nacho sets it up, sends a team of mercenaries to kill Lalo at his compound, and the report comes back that Lalo is dead. Gus believes it. He thinks the problem is solved. He can move forward with his plans without worrying about the smartest and most dangerous Salamanca watching his every move. But Lalo isn't dead. He survived the hit and he's furious. And instead of assuming Lalo might still be alive and taking precautions, Gus just carries on like the threat is neutralized. This is completely out of character for Gus. The man who plans everything, who accounts for every variable, who never takes unnecessary risks, just assumes his enemy is dead without confirming the body himself. and this assumption almost gets him killed. Lalo comes back, starts investigating Gus's operation, figures out about the super lab. Lalo breaks into Gus's house ready to execute him. Gus only survives because he's paranoid enough to have a gun hidden in his own home, and because Mike arrives just in time. But the damage is done. Lalo's investigation exposes vulnerabilities in Gus's operation. The stress of dealing with Lalo causes Gus to make other mistakes, and ultimately, the paranoia and pressure of running a meth empire is what leads to Gus getting involved with Walter White, which is how he ends up with half his face blown off in a nursing home. If Gus had just verified Lalo was actually dead, if he'd sent people to confirm the body or stayed vigilant for signs Lalo survived, he could have avoided all of this. But his hatred for the Salamancas and his eagerness to believe Lalo was gone clouded his usually perfect judgment. One lapse in his godlike control and it set off a chain reaction that eventually destroyed everything he built. Nacho Varga, trying to save his father by playing both sides. Nacho's worst mistake is thinking he can manipulate both the cartel and Gus Fring while keeping his father safe. Nacho is in an impossible situation from the start. He's working for the Salamancas, specifically Tuco and then Hector, doing criminal stuff that he's good at but doesn't particularly enjoy. What he really cares about is his dad, who runs a legitimate upholstery shop and wants nothing to do with the criminal world. Nacho's trying to keep these two worlds separate. He doesn't want his dad to know what he does. He doesn't want the cartel anywhere near his father's business. That's his line. That's the one thing he won't compromise on. Then, Hector decides he wants to use Nacho's dad's shop to smuggle drugs across the border, and Nacho realizes his worst nightmare is coming true. The cartel is going to corrupt his father's business and destroy the one clean thing in Nacho's life. So Nacho makes a desperate move. He tries to kill Hector by switching his pills. He's working with Gus at this point, playing both sides, trying to get out from under the cartel while also trying to protect his dad. The pill switch works. Hector has a stroke and ends up in a wheelchair, unable to speak. But the Salamancas suspect someone betrayed them, and Nacho becomes a target. From that point on, Nacho's life is just running and hiding and trying to stay ahead of people who want to kill him. He's doing jobs for Gus to stay protected, but Gus doesn't actually care about him. Gus is using him as a pawn in his war with the Salamancas. Nacho's fatal flaw is thinking he could save his father by playing these dangerous games. He should have just run when he had the chance, take his dad, get fake IDs, disappear to Canada or somewhere the cartel would never find them. Yeah, it would mean leaving everything behind, but at least they'd be alive. Instead, Nacho tries to be clever, tries to manipulate the most dangerous people in the drug trade, and it gets him killed. He ends up alone in the desert in Mexico, surrounded by cartel members and corrupt federales, forced to make a choice between his father's life and his own. Nacho chooses his father. He takes the blame for everything, makes a deal that his father will be left alone, and then kills himself rather than give the Salamancas the satisfaction. It's a noble death in its own way. Nacho goes out on his own terms and saves his dad, but the tragedy is that if he'd just made different choices earlier, if he'd run instead of fighting, he wouldn't have had to die at all. Howard Hamlin, not walking away from Jimmy and Kim. Howard's worst mistake is letting his pride keep him engaged with Jimmy and Kim when he should have just cut them off completely. Howard is this successful lawyer, partner at HHM, living what looks like a perfect life. Nice car, nice suits, respected in the legal community. But underneath all that, Howard's got his own insecurities and struggles. When Jimmy starts practicing law, he's constantly in Howard's orbit because of the connection through Chuck. And Jimmy resents Howard for not hiring him at HHM, for blocking his opportunities, even though most of that was actually Chuck's doing behind the scenes. Howard knows Jimmy doesn't like him. He knows Jimmy's capable of pulling scams and causing problems. And at first, Howard handles it professionally. He tries to be cordial, tries to make peace, even offers Jimmy a job at one point after Chuck dies. But Jimmy won't let it go. And then Kim gets involved. They start running this elaborate scheme to destroy Howard's reputation. They're gaslighting him, making him think he's losing his mind, setting him up to look incompetent and unstable. Howard starts to figure out something's going on. He knows they're up to something. He can tell Jimmy and Kim are plotting against him. His instincts are telling him these two are dangerous and he needs to stay away. But Howard can't help himself. He's too proud to just walk away. He needs to win. He needs to prove he's smarter than them. He needs to confront them and show them they can't beat him. So Howard shows up at their apartment after they've humiliated him in the mediation. He's there to tell them he knows what they did and he's not going to let them get away with it. He's going to expose them, report them to the bar, ruin their careers the way they tried to ruin his. And while he's giving this speech, while he's being righteous and indignant, Lalo Salamanca walks in. Lalo's there for completely unrelated reasons having to do with the cartel stuff. But Howard's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lalo shoots Howard in the head, just like that. Howard dies on the floor of their apartment because he couldn't let go of his need to confront Jimmy and Kim. If Howard had just ignored them, if he'd reported them to the bar anonymously and moved on with his life, he'd still be alive. But he had to win. He had to have the last word. And that need got him killed. Howard's tragedy is that he actually wasn't a bad guy. He was kind of stuffy and self-important, but he tried to do right by people. He didn't deserve what happened to him, but his fatal flaw was underestimating how far into the criminal world Jimmy and Kim had fallen and not walking away when he still could. Lalo Salamanca, underestimating Gus's patience. Lalo's worst mistake is thinking he could beat Gus Fring by being faster and more aggressive when Gus's real weapon was patience. Lalo is brilliant. He's charming, he's ruthless, he's several steps ahead of almost everyone around him. He survives an assassination attempt that should have killed him. He figures out Gus is building a super lab. He's got Gus on the ropes. But Lalo makes the classic mistake of underestimating his opponent. He thinks because he's smarter than the other Salamancas, because he survived Gus's hit, because he found the lab, that he's already won. So Lalo decides to go after Gus directly. He breaks into Gus's house, plans to execute him, force him to call his men away from the laundry so Lalo can get proof of the super lab, and Gus plays along. He acts scared, acts like he's cooperating, makes Lalo think he's in control, but the whole time, Gus is waiting for his moment. He's got a gun hidden, he's stalling, he's positioning himself. When Gus gets his opening, he takes it. He shoots out the lights, uses the darkness and his knowledge of his own house to get the advantage, and kills Lalo in the super lab under the laundry. Lalo's mistake was thinking the game was about who was smarter or more aggressive, but Gus was playing a different game entirely. Gus was willing to wait, willing to look weak, willing to let Lalo think he was winning, also he could strike at exactly the right moment. If Lalo had been more patient himself, if he'd taken more time to plan, if he hadn't gotten cocky and tried to end everything in one night, he might have actually beaten Gus. But his arrogance turned him from the hunter into the prey, and in the end, Lalo ends up buried under the lab he tried to expose, forgotten by everyone except the few people who knew he existed. His whole elaborate plan, his survival, his investigation, all of it ends with him dead in a hole in the ground because he thought being smart and fast was enough. So that's every major character in Better Call Saul, and the one decision that ruined everything for them. Jimmy choosing cons over honesty, Kim choosing revenge over integrity, Chuck choosing pride over family, Mike choosing blood money over clean hands, Gus choosing assumptions over verification, Nacho choosing impossible saves over escape, Howard choosing confrontation over walking away, Lalo choosing speed over patience. Better Call Saul is a tragedy where every character has a chance to avoid disaster and every single one of them makes the wrong choice. That's what makes it so brutal to watch. You can see the exit signs and nobody takes them. Let me know in the comments which mistake you think was the worst, or if there's a character whose big mistake I missed. This show is so dense with bad decisions that I could probably do a whole other video just on secondary characters.